Hi, and welcome to the World Beyond Belief. Again, with us today, we have Eric Karlstrom, and we've been promising for months now, I guess, to get back with Eric because we have been talking about um, global warming and the hoax of global warming, and we were talking about the New Age deception. And part of the New Age deception is this music, how Tavistock, the Frankfurt School, and all the affiliates have been manipulating us through music. So we're going to learn a lot about that today from Eric. How are you doing, Eric? Welcome to the World Beyond Belief.
Well, hi, Paul. It's good to be talking to you again across vast distances with modern technology. And yeah, things are fine here in Colorado, southern Colorado. Although, speaking of global warming, we've had snow the last several days. We got a foot of snow
Gee.
in the last week, probably a foot and a half. And some places in the San Luis Valley got quite a bit more. So this is kind of a winter that doesn't want to let go. And I want to get to my garden, but we need the moisture, so we'll take it.
Yeah,
So
good.
yeah, the global warming thing is a gigantic piece of propaganda, and I think a lot of the effect of these things is to try to dumb us down. I talk to people about this, but yeah, our topic is different today, and it's a very interesting topic, music, because I think we all kind of love and identify with music, and we have our connections with music. I hope we don't step on too many toes as we talk about music, because it is subjective.
Well, yeah, it's subjective, but it has been a big tool, and they have used it. I mean, if we just talk about the Beatles alone, we know, they used their trick, the same trick they used with Miley Cyrus. Innocent in the beginning, and then more and more gradually, more and more satanic and more seductive toward the end.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was all very innocent when I started, or at least I thought so. Um, I think we're close to the same age. I'm 66. I grew up in Arlington, Virginia, and all my friends, which is right outside of Washington D.C., all my friends and I started playing guitars when the folk boom hit about 1963 or so with the Kingston Trio and Peter,
Yeah,
Paul, and Mary. And we went from baseball and football to teaching each other guitar, singing, and it was quite exciting. It was a lot of fun. It was extracurricular. We would form little bands, and I thought the music was like you said, very innocent, and a great way to express yourself. It really grabbed you. But then within a few short years, again, the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, now that the country had been swept into the folk craze, uh, Bob Dylan and a few others show up with electric guitars. And then of course this precipitated a cultural crisis for the folkies. What is
right.
he doing? What are they doing? Pete Seeger supposedly got up there with an axe and threatened to, cut the electrical cable, because this was noise. And anyway, the culture went, went cattywampus really from then on. And of course, by the late 60s, we were into this hideous acid rock that accompanied the dumping of LSD on the American youth by our favorite three-letter word, CIA, who had studied acid LSD for over 15 years and found out that it is a psychosis producing weapon of war. So now what we've got is war being, covert war being declared against the youth of America. And of course, it was undeclared. So we we're scrambling, in this new culture of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which was radically different from the world, I think, that our parents grew up in. Although I understand the 20s were pretty wild,
Right.
but our parents came out of the Depression and they were hardworking, and um, I think the music was designed, you get lots of quotes to the effect that it's designed to cause a generation gap so that the parents and the kids can't relate to each other anymore. So
It worked. It worked
it worked.
absolutely. They were listening to Tommy Dorsey, and we were listening to Santana, and what a gap it created.
Yeah, the generation gap. And then, of course, the war in Vietnam was going on simultaneously. And um, I think most of our parents would be a little bit like mine. They came through World War II, and they bought into the anti-communism rhetoric of national security. Gotta nip that communism in the bud in
Right.
Vietnam and Guatemala and Iraq. And anytime there was a third world nation that wanted to, use its resources for the benefit of its own people, then our
Wow.
CIA, yeah, what a concept. Then our CIA quickly and our media quickly painted them as left-leaning communist, um, great threat to national security.
Right.
Well, it wasn't a threat to our national security. It was perhaps a threat to our corporate control. I think we've had tremendous confusion in this country. I've had friends that worked in the State Department, and it's understood, people my age, that the national interest in the State Department was always IT&T and
Sure.
Bechtel and the corporations. That's the national interest, and then national security, which we still hear a lot of nowadays. That's really the interests of the fascist corporate system. And so we've got this tremendous confusion of terms, and people integrate this, of course, through repetition. They hear it over and over again. They believe it. That's what propaganda is,
Right.
and then the music is very powerful. I think we maybe should say a couple words about music. It's fairly almost mysterious quality. It has a powerful emotional effect. It can have. The Bible talks about it a lot. Says that we're supposed to praise God with it. And even there's implications in the Bible that Satan himself might have been the highest of the choir directors praising God, and then decided that he was
Right.
going to rebel, and he wanted that praise for himself. And so then, if you kind of go with that scenario, go with that, I don't know what to call it because I believe it now. You go with that system, then Satan wants to take that praise away from God and be praised himself. And meanwhile, he wants to, win your soul and corrupt you. And it seems like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll that took over in our generation. I would have been about 1967, 68, I'm just starting college, and you go to
Right.
college and all of a sudden, your friends are smoking dope and you've never
Right.
even seen dope before,
Right.
and they're listening to all this tremendous music. It was quite the cultural shock, really, a cultural shock in your own backyard, in your own country. So
Right.
this was, like you say, imported. It was scripted. The Tavistock, as you say, is this world's brainwashing center, mother of all think tanks, I think you called it in a previous interview. And it is taking its cues from the Frankfurt School out of Germany. So it's an international kind of system. And then, of course, they have all their extension think tanks here in this country, RAND and Stanford
Heritage.
Research Institute and Wharton School of
Right.
Economics and MIT, and you go down the list. There's hundreds of them, and of course, this is right out of Britain. It's coming out of the psychological warfare division of the British Army right after World War I. So what we've seen is the weaponization of music, the weaponization of psychology, the weaponization of sociology and anthropology, and of course the weaponization of space, the earth, the chemtrails, the atmosphere, weaponization of the atmosphere. So there is this very persistent, I guess you'd call it the ruling class. Fascism is top-down revolution. They're pushing the revolution, and they're doing it through very, very smart hirelings at these think tanks. we're really battling against some tremendously intelligent, and I would say perhaps psychopathic individuals, who seem to be hell bent on gaining control of the entire system and taking out we the people. And what
Right.
makes it, of course, interesting is that we still have in this country at least lip service to the U.S. Constitution, which says that our rights are given to us by God, and we, the people, own the government. Well, it's been quite a while since our presidents have acted independently. Um, I just did an extended series on my website, 911nwo.com, which I do for educational purposes. I'm not making money on it. On the life and career of Allen Dulles, who was, of course, the first CIA director. And 1953 to 1961 under Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. And this guy, who was, a lawyer with Sullivan and Cromwell, the top corporate legal firm out of Wall Street, legal firm for the Rockefellers and all the other robber barons, basically, he acted with impunity. I mean, he betrayed and sabotaged every presidential administration he worked for over a period of 50 years. So these guys, they're above the law. They think they're above the law. And we're really getting to the point where we can kind of reconstruct and rectify and correct the propaganda version of history that we've been given by, again, these very powerful sources. And so when I did my article, very extended article, I don't know, 100 pages on Allen Dulles, I'm quoting directly out of 40 or 50 books, alternative history books that are in my library. And I'm getting, to the point where I don't care if it's online, it can be long. It's kind of just like a resource for people. Somebody's going to read it, probably intelligence agencies. but the documentation is there. I mean, this is coming from scholars, a lot of it. And, Charles Hyam, Trading with the Enemy, talking about the connections, the Nazi-American connections before, during, and after World War II. I mean, Allen Dulles was setting up the Hitler regime with his buddies, the Rockefellers and the Bushes and the Harrimans.
Right.
And then he had extended Rockefeller, Standard Oil, and Chase Bank had extended connections with IG Farben, which is this gigantic cartel, chemical cartel of Germany that allowed Germany to become the Third Reich. So the enemy was created largely by Britain and American financiers, so that Germany could squash their biggest rival, or hopefully would neutralize their biggest rival, which was Soviet Union. And they hoped they would kill each other in the process. But meanwhile, all those Nazis came into the United States after World War II with Operation Paperclip.
Right.
Thousands of scientists who were rocket scientists and mind control scientists. So that's where our MK Ultra programs really, really derive. And then there's old Allen Dulles. After World War II, he's got all kinds of complex financial agreements with Martin Bormann, who was, of course, the money man for the Nazis, who made it through the rat lines over to Argentina after World War II. And so your continent had lots of Nazis, and I'm sure it still does.
I'm sure it does.
So anyway, I think to put this in the larger context, we are looking at the weaponization of music. America seems to have been the lapdog of the Cecil Rhodes roundtable groups out of Britain wanted, their stated goals are to bring America back under its colonial status. And but first, however, it's supposed to be used to implement their New World Order. So we are the world's policemen. But even as we are, have our troops in 160 out of 195 countries right now, and our advisors, military advisors, America's being destroyed from within, and it has been for, as you know, decades. And the music and the cultural terrorism that has been applied here deliberately by these subversive elements America is staggering. America is reeling. There's a tremendous amount of Satanism in this country, and I think, as you say, the rock music um, really feeds that, and it's known that it feeds it. I mean, so what the picture that I'm getting is that we live in a world which is physical, but there is a spiritual component, and there are apparently powers and principalities. And people can like John Dee, the first great 007 spy for Queen Elizabeth back in the 1600s. He was a genius well, he was a spy. He was a Kabbalist. He was a geographer. He was an astrologer. He was kind of the Merlin, I guess, prototype of that. But he was also a Rosicrucian.
Right.
And this is a secret society that's, more or less, based on magic. And his disciple, his main one, John Dee was apparently head of the Rosicrucians in England at that time. His main disciple, Francis Bacon, the modern father of science, who was also head of the Rosicrucians. Some people say he was the guy who really, presided over the Shakespeare's writings, because he was a courtier and very much an insider. But anyway, so you have this weird mix of spying and Satanism, which you can trace up to Aleister Crowley, who was
Sure.
also MI6 in the early part of the 1900s, and he called himself the Beast 666. And he was part of the Golden Dawn, the Ordo Templi Orientis. So again, you have this weird mix of spies and Satanism. And I'm afraid with the Nazis, you see it again. Nazis is a death cult. The Skull and Bones is a death cult. It's a American branch of the Illuminati, both of which call
Sure.
themselves the Order of Death.
Sure.
And that's, of course, our George W. Bush, his father, George H.W. Bush, and his father, Prescott Bush, all Yale Skull and Bones insiders. Prescott Bush probably did as much as Allen Dulles to create the Nazis.
Sure.
So there's this whole subtext to American history that we're not taught, and I've come to grips with since retiring as a geography professor in 2011. And then, hopefully we'll get back to the music. That's been my real love ever since I learned folk music back in the 60s. And I've been playing bluegrass and writing my own stuff. And I've got like 22 CDs I've made. And I've discovered that it's very hard to make a living in music, even if you're pretty good at it. There's all the promotion and all that stuff, marketing. But the music, it must be seen, I think, in this larger context that there is this the drugs. The drugs came into this country on a large scale in the late '60s with the rock and roll music on a wide scale. So again, Tavistock, has his documentation. They wanted to shift America from being a kind of industrial, progressive, rational, scientific Christian nation, which was hard to take down. They wanted to shift us into kind of into supernaturalism and mysticism and spiritism, occult, black magic, Satanism. And they found that the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, like of the ISIS cult and the Dionysian cults, that Britain elite had been involved with for a long time, and the Nazis were certainly involved with. They wanted to transfer this to America, and they did. And so now America is having a hard time telling up from down, right from wrong.
Right.
What's the truth? What's a lie? There's so much propaganda. And, of course, Timothy Leary years ago, the CIA asset, who was a Harvard professor, guru of LSD, is telling the kids, turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Right.
And well, a lot of people did that, and they went to the communes, and a lot of them wrecked their lives with drugs. And I'm sure you know some of those people, and I know the casualties.
right?
Maybe that's what we should talk about for a second, Paul,
Yeah.
because and I'd like to hear from you too. There was quite a toll, I think.
Well, we lost a lot of our peer group to Vietnam. I mean, when I just right out of high school, out of college, we lost a lot to Vietnam, and the rest of us we were during an awakening, and so we were looking for uh, civil justice, and we were looking for ending the war, and I think the Tavistock group uh, co-opted us with music into sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I know that we did a podcast that's been subsequently they took the soundtrack down from, showing music before and after like 65. Before the music that kids were listening to, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. You were listening to the Kingston Trio. Actually, I sang for a group in college called the Duck Creek Boys. It was modeled after the Kingston Trio. And it was a lot of fun and really innocent. But then after 65, you've got a real seriousness to the music. Even the Mamas and the Papas, and of course, this is when Laurel Canyon was blooming, and that was a satanic cult that was creating a lot of the music that was influencing us. So we were swept up, and next thing you know, we were at Woodstock, crawling around in the mud, taking LSD, and far cry from what our parents, who fought in World War II, had in mind for us.
Yeah, you mentioned Laurel Canyon, you mentioned Woodstock, and of course, these are gigantic cultural icons of the late '60s. And now, with the benefit of some research and 2020 hindsight, it does seem like Woodstock was a CIA operation.
Yeah,
CIA being an extension, really, of the Tavistock Institute, trained by British intelligence, MI6, and this phenomenal book that has come out by David McGowan called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, Laurel Canyon, Covert Ops, and the Dark Heart of the Hippie Dream. I just can't say enough of good things about David McGowan, who unfortunately has died, I think, last fall. He's out of the LA area, lived in the area of Laurel Canyon. He's about 10 years younger, perhaps, than the hippie generation. He grew up, maybe a decade later. But his research into what really happened in Laurel Canyon is a game changer.
absolutely.
As you say, and I've heard you talk about this in one of your podcasts. This was a covert operation. And of course, then you can start to look at the British invasion of the
Right.
Beatles and the Rolling Stones, et cetera, as being an operation of Tavistock, and the Laurel Canyon thing being a CIA extension operation and American military intelligence. And of course, the clincher here, as you've noted, is that Jim Morrison and Frank Zappa and John Phillips and these real icons of the '60s who were the movers and shakers. So many of them were children of people who were very prominent in military intelligence.
Right.
So, and of course, you mentioned Jim Morrison of the Doors, the name taken from Aldous Huxley's book, or not, William James' book, The Doors of Perception, having to do with drugs and drugs in spiritual explorations, etc. Jim Morrison was not a singer. He was not a musician.
Right.
He was somebody who was just used and put in that position. And the world that you start to see when you look at the world that David McGowan has reconstructed is just completely different from the one that we're presented with. And that what you find is that, there are children of elite families who are scripted to take certain roles. And this can be serial killers. You know, you could have
Right.
Jeffrey Dahmer coming from a good family to be a serial killer, or that same family could produce another son who's a rock star, and then
Absolutely.
they're moving us towards a world of complete control, lockdown, fascist lockdown, I suppose, and of course, as you point out, I mean, the war in Vietnam was a hideous time. Our friends and our relatives who were going over to Vietnam to die 13,000 miles away in a senseless war, fighting peasants who didn't know the difference between communism and capitalism. Um, and Meanwhile, our CIA did. You read Fletcher Prouty's book on the secret team. Our CIA did everything to take over the Vietnam War and the drug trade in Southeast Asia after the French left in 1954. And it was totally a CIA operation, the Vietnam War. And it wasn't until 1964 that any other services sent in soldiers. But it was completely Ed Lansdale and people like that, The Quiet American, The Ugly American, are books that are written about this. This is completely a CIA covert op, which of course escalated into this gigantic war. Took 11 years of our country officially, but again, it was started in 52, 53 under the CIA, and killed maybe 58,000 Americans and 2 to 3 million peasants in Vietnam,
Right.
Laos, and Cambodia. Meanwhile, the heroin is CIA had taken over the heroin industry from France with in Laos, the poppy industry, and 1/3 at one point, I think in the late 60s, 1/3 of our soldiers in Vietnam were addicted to heroin. Well, you can see why. They're living in a
Sure.
hellhole. And the CIA just happens to supply them with the drugs. And then the drugs come back to this country through often, airplanes. Sometimes even the stories go, you could get 50 pounds of heroin inside a body bag of a dead soldier.
Right.
Wow. I mean, this is satanic. This is evil. And then, of course, our friends. I have a good friend that I grew up with in Virginia, one of the folk music guys that I grew up with, Jimmy Eisenberg, who, was seduced by, the way Mick Jagger was on stage and the way Jimi Hendrix was on stage. And of course, Mick Jagger and Jimi Hendrix were doing heroin. So my friend was being a rock singer and thought he was really special and cool, and he did heroin, and he was dead by the time he was 20
Wow.
of an overdose of heroin. So, we all know people that, and of course, he was a tremendously creative guy, very smart. I mean, I grew up with this guy. He was always at the top of the class in terms of reading. He had read all of Steinbeck by the time he was in the 9th grade.
Right.
This guy was smarter than me in terms of a lot of things. And my parents both PhDs, so I guess I should be pretty smart. But anyway, I mean, he was in the purple reader and I was in the blue reader.
Right.
And so I figured that, this guy's ahead of me, and color coded with the rainbow, of course. So that's what we grew up with in elementary school. But anyway, Jimmy was a casualty. And, now that I see the world spiritually more than I did then, breaks my heart to think he's he lived through hell, and he may be there now. I don't know.
Yeah.
His father was a minister. Of course, I can't judge, but he helped me write some songs in which he clearly understood the spiritual dimension of life.
Yeah, I want to stop for a minute and go into that, because at the same time we're listening to this music, and we're going to we're following the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and going to Woodstock. The culture is filtering out all references that allow us to see clearly what's going on. In other words, the devil doesn't exist. It's just If you go to a psychologist and tell them you're irritated by a devil, well, they'll give you some drugs and you can relax. And demons, they don't exist. That's not part of the vernacular. That's not part of the culture. So to deal with what we were seeing happening, say at Woodstock, where some of the performers there, notably Santana, I think Joe Cocker also, say that they were physically, well, they were incorporating an entity. They were physically taken over by a demonic, I suggest demonic, uh, entity that performed through this music. So I think while at the same time all this is happening and we're being led in this direction, our ability to language it has been taken away. And it looks like just, hey, a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We finally got out of Vietnam. They finally passed the Civil Rights Act, which was the worst thing they could have ever done to help anyone. Um, and here we are without a way to deal with it intellectually. What do you?
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah, I mean, I've retired now from 30 years of being a professor, and I'm really starting to I have the luxury now, with a decent retirement, to explore these things that, when you're in a career, usually you're kind of, your back's to the wall. There's all kinds of things to do. And I've often thought that academics was a very shrewd and clever system to keep smart people, chasing their tails,
Uh-huh.
so that they really, they're so busy they can't really see the big picture because we're all dealing with, our own little sliver of knowledge. But one of the things that I've explored recently is I bought a video, a couple of them, called "They Sold Their Soul for Rock and Roll" by a California pastor by the name of Joe Schimmel. Well, Joe was in the rock and roll business, and so he knows he was possessed. He was writing songs, and he discusses this in the film. He tells the words of his song. Well, he didn't even know what some of the words meant.
Right.
He had to look them up. And then he realized what was happening. He became a Christian pastor, and he was able to get part of the words, I think, was he was going to sacrifice his whole family, for the thrill and the power that comes with rock and roll. Well, he got off that train and became a pastor, and he said he got his family into that denomination. So he says that, fortunately that didn't play out. But yes, there's a 3-hour version of this movie and a 10-hour version. And he has so many video clips of these bands, various bands. So many of the songs are addressed to Satan. So many of the interviews, they talk about being possessed on stage, giving them their energy. It's like they're a conduit of, I
Right.
mean, you hear this from Mick Jagger, you hear this Keith Richards, you hear this from so many of the famous bands, that if you didn't believe in spirit possession or demon possession, it would certainly make you think
Right.
maybe there is something to it, because this is, they sold their soul for rock and roll is actually the reality. He tells the story in there, which I think is well documented, of the king of the Delta blues, a guy named Robert Johnson, a black guy who lived in
Right.
Mississippi, and this is in the film, who was a lousy guitar player, but he would hang out with the good ones, and he would grab their guitar at the break, and he would, try to play some songs, and I guess he was terrible, and the audience would always complain to the real musicians. And then this guy supposedly went out, he did, I guess, go out to the crossroads in
Right.
Mississippi, in Clarksdale, Mississippi, on the corner of, it's just, straight cross, X there between Highway 49 and Highway 61. And apparently he sold his soul to the devil. And then he came back and he became the greatest guitar blues player ever and the father of modern rock and roll music. So here's a guy, and the case is pretty well established by lots of people he knew. He was terrible before he sold his soul. He was great after he sold his soul. Fantastic Eric Clapton heroized him and thought he was the best ever. And you hear that in the movie, saying this guy was the greatest of all time. You hear Keith Richards saying the same thing. Well, this is apparently the reality that it's available.
Right.
And of course, this is what John Dee did. I guess he must have summoned angels, and this is what Aleister Crowley did. He must, and I guess the scenario is you sell your soul for worldly power and wealth and whatever you want, and and then you go to hell. I mean, what a bad deal! That's a terrible deal, if you ask me.
Me
And
too.
yet, people right on through the ages do it. Yeah, I'm afraid this is what's underneath, and behind it is this spiritual war. Um, Angels and demons, and God and the devil. And for Christians like myself, Jesus turned down that deal.
Right.
Satan said, bow down to me, and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. And Jesus said, no. And but then lots of others have accepted that deal. And so many rock stars that it kind of breaks your heart. And then these become, again, the idols. Like my friend Jimmy Eisenberg, he kind of worshipped Jimi Hendrix and Mick Jagger, and he went right down that road. And maybe Mick Jagger's got the physical constitution where or Keith Richards, they can do heroin for a lifetime and live. My friend Jimmy couldn't.
Right.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
the people that are in that group that have already sold themselves, and I really think it helps to language what we're going through. I mean, I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, but the language really helps you understand and ferret out what's going on, because there's nobody disguising this. I mean, Bob Dylan talked on 60 Minutes about going to the crossroads, and making the deal, and that's what's happened. And it's so sad, because some of the music I think is just so very beautiful and so inspiring, that to know that it's produced by the dark side is it's a tough one.
Well, on this movie, which I was just watching last night, uh, Anton LaVey, who was, of course, the father of the Church of Satan, which was
Right.
founded in, June 6th, 1966. He was an organist with the carnival,
Right.
and he said Satan's got all the best tunes.
Think,
And of course, if you read the Bible carefully, as of course many do, there's an implication that Satan has lots and lots, or had lots of, maybe has lots of musical instruments in his body. So he was the head, according to that belief system, kind of the choir director. And he could make beautiful music in worship of God. Um, and then he rebelled. He's the father
right.
of rebellion and revolution on this earth as well. And music seems to be a very, very powerful tool to affect moods. And Anton LaVey says, yeah, music has the power to make you want to go murder someone or go to a mall and start
Wow.
shooting. And he says that's just great. And if the music can then inspire the young to look into Satanism, he's all for it. Well, okay, the lines are drawn here. It's like okay, the enemy from a Christian
Right.
point of view is working hard and seems to be having a lot of success. Whether or not we're actually in the end times, I don't know, but it sure looks that way.
Yeah. Looks bad. Looks bad.
It doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't look good. I always think of, I think I've said this before, and I don't want to be too redundant, but the electric guitar, to me, it just reaches right inside my chest and does what it wants to with my heart. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it was invented 10 years before the Great Awakening in '65, the Tavistock orchestrated uh, breaking off from the parents, breaking off from the traditional culture, and then having this very powerful instrument to just reach in there and do, and they really haven't stopped using it. I mean, it hasn't gone out of style. It's still the major, even in the new music, which is really horrible. Which is another thing we should talk about. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please. Well, you know, the acid rock by 1968 and 1969 was, you know, it was awful. I hated it, and I always I really turned off the radio at that point, and I kind of kept in my folk music, and I got into bluegrass, and I got into piano, and I've made 22 CDs myself. But of course, the power structure doesn't, you know, it wants to promote.
Yeah.
You know, its own, of course, and I'm not saying that otherwise I would be famous, but I realize that the system is extremely rigged when you have, you know, the Laurel Canyon story, the sons and daughters of the military intelligence who are of course skyrocketed to fame because they get the media exposure.
Sure.
There's big money behind that. And these, I have to, you know, frankly admit that, you know, I loved Joni Mitchell and I loved the Byrds, the first folk rock group, but they were really out of the Laurel Canyon scene, you know. And a lot of these, I bought that record, and that was the first record, long playing record, the album that I bought was the Byrds, and you know, had a lot of good songs on it, and you know, it hooked me. But and I played in a kind of a folk rock group in high school, electric guitar. But then I stayed acoustic after that all my life. But went off to college in 1967, 68, 69 area. And all my buddies, my friends, my guitar drinking buddies from the East and the West Coast, they're all playing black blues. And so I learned how to play that a little bit, you know, and but it was in the culture. It was at all levels of the culture. The commercial, the media, even the academic, even at that point, was reinforcing this. Again, you start to look at the Tavistock and the long reach of Tavistock and the think tanks, like you've said. The music is a part of this system. Certainly had overtones of the occult and Satanism. We didn't know it. All we knew was, you know, whether we liked it or not, we gravitated towards it. You know, some people would just, I remember, reminiscing here, Paul, I remember going to Prescott College, which was fairly progressive liberal arts school in the late 60s. My friend and I wanted to drive to Flagstaff, go skiing at the San Francisco Peaks. My friend had a Doors album. I guess it would have been some kind of a cassette tape or before that. And he played it all the way, you know, and Baby Light My Fire. And I mean, it was just, you know, it was numbing music, actually.
Well, it was probably an 8-track.
It was an 8-track.
Yeah.
It was an 8-track.
Only old guys remember 8-tracks.
That's right. But anyway, he loved that thing, and I wasn't quite as, I still more or less liked acoustic sound on the guitar, but that's because I started with that. But yeah, it was a sea change, and of course, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, you know, make these comments, or did make these comments, that, you know, when the music changes, the culture has to change too. And what we see then is the actual deliberate, you know, from our superiors in these think tanks, imposing this upon us. And we really thought, we really believed that the music was ours, and it was an organic reaction to very, very oppressive war in Vietnam and a police state emerging. And of course, Alan Dulles lived till 69. And a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with now in terms of, you know, rendition and, you know, all kinds of spying on citizens in America as well as abroad, and assassinations and coups and concentration camps and Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib type things. He was doing this back in the 50s and 60s. And he was doing it really for the the moneyed elite, his clients on Wall Street, the people that backed Smedley Butler. In 1934, this Brigadier General, Marine, most decorated soldier in American history, they approached him in 1934 and asked him to lead a coup, fascist coup, to depose FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the president, and so they could run the country. Well, this is the backdrop here, and this is the Prescott Bushes and the
Sure.
George H.W. Bushes. This is the Illuminati families. Let's face it, we're dealing with Satanist families, and many of whom the kids probably were sexually abused under satanic ritual abuse, and this is the dark side of culture that now is starting to see the light a little bit. We're dealing with satanic ritual abuse, and those kinds of mind control have now been applied to the public at large. Again, thanks to the CIA's MK Ultra, Bluebird, Artichoke, MK
Right.
Delta, MK Naomi, all these top secret mind control experiments and programs, Monarch, which comes directly from the Nazis. They called it marionette programming. So you could turn a human being into a mind-controlled robot, some of whom would be sex slaves, like Marilyn Monroe was evidently one of the first. These people have been so fractured and fragmented in terms of their identities that they, you really have to ask whether they actually have souls or had souls, because they have been so invaded as a child and so controlled subsequently. It's very tragic to think that human beings would do this to other human beings, and yet that seems to be, kind of what's underneath this. And since the, World War II, especially with the Nazis, and then coming into America with Paperclip and MK Ultra, it has gotten more and more prevalent, and then it's gotten a greater and greater representation in our media system. Our CEOs are of our Fortune 500 companies. They're required to go take classes, quote unquote, at Tavistock,
Right.
so that they can be good soldiers in this New World Order, fascist New World Order that is being constructed. And then music, I think, is that this is to hook people in to the satanic world. Or at least so much of the popular music, and yet music still has the power to bring us up, I think, towards truth, love, and beauty, the three transcendentals that the Catholics talk about, to God. I think it still is a very powerful tool, can be, for worship, for and to edify and encourage and to make us the best. I mean, they've shown that, kids listening to Mozart and other kinds of Bach, this just makes them smarter. So music is this enormous double-edged sword, which, the whole culture now is feeling the effects, especially of this dark edge of music that we're talking about. But let's not forget that it also has this potential. And this is what I try to do with my music. I don't know if I'm successful. I really look at myself and I wonder, okay, I love music. What is this music of?
Right.
Is this music of God? Is this music of the devil? How do I sort that out? I like beautiful music. I gravitate towards what I think is beautiful music, but then it's subjective. So maybe you could have some perspective on that too, Paul.
Well, I don't know. I was hoping you did. I think it's very difficult, because I think they've really been using it to put us wherever they want to put us. I explore all different kind of music, especially older music and new music. I'm always interested in something different. So we started listening to the music that was alongside the teenage music. When I was growing up in the late 50s and 60s, teenagers were created at that point. I believe, and we were given our own music, and it was the Dion and the Belmonts and the Fleetwoods and some of those old things. This is before they really wanted to take us into the dark side. They were playing with that. But while we were listening to that, I think it's really interesting. Our parents were listening to specific types of music that dealt with secret agents and spies. There was a lot of secret agent music. Jet set. They called themselves jet setters. So there was a type of jazz and music that were jet setters, and the other one was a preoccupation with space because they were starting to get us ready to the '60s and whatever deception happened in the '60s. So it was interesting that on the one hand they were dealing with our parents' generation and taking them. They were putting us into the kind of the romantic, put your head on my shoulder kind of thing. We were really softened up, and then bingo, here we go into the Laurel Canyon sex, drugs, rock and roll, the deeply satanic stuff that took me through my the rest of my music listening was into Pink Floyd and really heavy duty rock and roll. But to try to pull yourself out and say, well, that stuff was designed to entice us into kind of a satanic mindset, and try to pull out of that music that would be good and pure and wholesome. Because, I mean, if you look at it's really tough to call yourself a Christian because it's liable to send somebody off into one of these churches. And most of the churches are just as corrupt as rock and roll. So it has to be a personal relationship. Go ahead. Why don't you chime in on
I
this?
think that's absolutely a good observation. You know, we have these rock and roll Christian rock now in the churches, and I guess this started in Southern California and has now swept the nation. And I was playing music with a guy down not too far from where I live, about my age, who's quite a good musician. He had played with various Christian rock groups, and he is now playing with a praise band at a Living Waters church down in Alamosa. And I decided to go visit that church and maybe, see what it was about. And I walked into this gigantic building with all kinds of little, rooms for kids and for this and for that. And it's kind of a mall approach to Christianity. And going in, seeing the main room there was a big stage and microphones and music stands and amps all across the front stage. And I didn't even slow down. I just kept walking out the next door.
Yeah.
Because I'd been to churches like that in California. I was in a bluegrass band, and our bass player was the music director. He had a music degree. He was a music director at one of those churches, and it was a rock and roll church, and there's rock songs are integrated with the sermon of the pastor, and terrible. I mean, to me, this is, you're not supposed to mix God and the devil according to the Bible.
Right.
You can't drink of the same cup of Satan and God, And that's exactly what is happening at so many of these big churches with rock and roll bands. And it breaks my heart too. And so, yes, does make it difficult to be a Christian. I have to tell you a little story since we're talking music. I've, spent, the last 40 some years trying to master the 5-string banjo, which is a bluegrass instrument, a very challenging one. And I've had some good teachers. And the last one I had in California is a guy who won the national banjo picking contest, I think in 2005 at Winfield, Kansas, Banjo Player of the Year, and he wins other festivals. And for a little while, he was, trying to make a living at it, winning contests.
Right.
You win a banjo, which you can sell for $3,000 if you win first. But of course, there's fierce competition. There was a while there when he was winning those, And so, wonderful guy named Brian Anderson, who also had been a Christian pastor for many years, and gave up the banjo. He started out, I think, in high school playing banjo with a gospel group, and got very good very quickly. And of course, his heart was in the right place in that sense, because he was playing gospel music, which is really praising God, and it's acoustic, and I love it. Of course, throws you into kind of the Baptist low church realm. But anyway, he he did that for 20 years, and then his wife said, okay, and he put the banjo aside, and then his wife said, okay, well, why don't you take it up again? He took it up again. He started winning the contests, and he got national champion. Well, when I talked to him and took lessons from him, I guess about 2006 to 10 or something like that, he was doing church at his own home. He had his own little flock, non-denominational.
Right.
I think that this is perhaps where the real Christianity is going to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's almost going to be an underground, slightly subversive movement. We're going to start to see the governments saying that, we have all these domestic terrorists now, and we have to watch out for these Christians and these veterans and these patriots and these people who believe in the Constitution.
Right.
And those are the bad guys now, And so the government is going to target these people with the Department of Homeland Security, and I'm sure it is doing that now, with all the gang stalking and neighborhood watch and citizen spies, and really a replay of the East German Stasi police state is happening here in America now. And the Department of Homeland Security was formed right after 9/11, and now it's got 225,000 employees and a budget of something like 40 or 50 billion dollars a year. Well, what are they doing? Well, they're gathering information on American citizens, and they're spying on us, and they are isolating those of us who they consider as quote unquote terrorists or potential terrorist threats. Well, that's anybody who disagrees with the state.
Right.
That's anybody who believes in the Constitution. That's anybody who believes in Jesus Christ.
Right.
That's me.
Right.
That's anybody who's a dissident, Well, we've got a problem, because our Constitution, gang stalking is a felony.
Right.
All these things are crimes, and yet that's what the government is doing with the help of our local police and with the help of our neighborhood. So we've got a criminal government which has extended right down into our communities. And this is going to get exposed. And the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned, because we still have laws on the books that say what these people are doing is illegal, unconstitutional, it's a felony. And yet we have vast networks of people. Now, I think a lot of the people that are doing this are duped into it because they think it's, they're vigilante neighborhood watch.
Right.
They're going to get the terrorists. They're told that this guy is, doing something subversive, and they want to help. In that regard, have you heard of the Milgram experiment, Paul?
Yeah, Milgram experiment.
Yeah, what they found in the Milgram experiment at Harvard years ago, Stanley Milgram, this psychologist, 70% of humans will obey an authority figure, somebody standing, next to them in a white coat or a police hat or whatever, and they will believe them. And if that authority figure tells them to go ahead and say shock, very high electrical voltage to somebody else, they will do it.
Absolutely.
70% of us are gullible enough, and of course this is the good German syndrome. Just following orders, sir.
That's right.
It's very scary, that 70% of us are so easily influenced by authority that we're willing to harm our fellow citizens on the basis of perhaps lies that authority figure has told us. And yet that's what's happening. And so all of these things, this gigantic soup of, 911 was a false flag, synthetic terror, state-sponsored, which again sets in motion this gigantic police state here, which targets quote-unquote domestic terrorists, which is anybody who doesn't believe, the state's version of what happened on 911 or whatever. We're going into lockdown here. And I know that you've done an excellent show recently on Jade Helm and Tavistock. I listened to that, Paul. That's very, very good, very
Thank
informative.
you.
Uh, and that is, can be done any time. It could be. It's ongoing right now in 7 or 8 states. All we need is a catalyst event, like a financial crisis or a nuclear explosion somewhere, or anything that the president deems as an emergency. Can that drill, which is ongoing with large number of military in 8 states, can go live, and we could throw us into a civil war scenario, or even um, Third World War.
Right.
But meanwhile, that's the kind of the catastrophic sort of Damocles scenario. But meanwhile, the gang stalking is going on, and is taking people out all over this country and all over the world. People are committing suicide because these programs are designed to, they want you to commit suicide. They want you to take yourself out.
Right.
So they profile you, and what they do is they harass you in ways that they atomize you, they isolate you, as David McGowan said eloquently in some of his interviews, and I'm sure he was isolated.
I'm sure he was. I'm sure
he was taken out by this kind of program, because he's the kind of person they would really want to take out. I mean, look at the beans that he spilled. That's huge what he did.
Right.
To me, it's mind-boggling that it takes a guy who's with a bachelor's in psychology, who is mostly a carpenter, to put this together. Just happened to be a good writer.
Yeah.
And now it's disseminated. And the secret, one of those big, big, big secrets, which they've sat on for half a century almost, is now out of the bag. And of course, these secrets are coming out of the bag.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's the whole objective of Jade Helm, is to take out dissidents. So obviously, we are having
right.
Having an impact, and the state, the people that own the state, are very concerned about it. So you could look at Jade Helm as a psyop. It's supposed to scare people like me and you into silence. But it's not working, because I've got a bumper sticker on the back of my truck that says gang stalking is murder. And then I've got another one that says gang stalkers go to hell.
Right.
And then I've got another one that says shooters equals CIA MK Ultra. And then I've got another one that says CIA equals cults in America.
Right.
And then I've got another one that says Jesus Christ is Lord. And I've got another one that says a good website on this subject of gang stalking called fightgangstalking.com. And that's all I've got on there right now. But, as I drive down the road, people are going to read that. And so that's a little bit of freedom of speech there. Of course, they want to take people like me out. David McGowan. I've been working on the 911 thing since it happened. Let me just give you my websites here.
Yeah, do that.
For your listeners. 911nwo.com is the one I've been working on. That's, of course, 911newworldorder.com. Since 911. I've also got one that exposes the global warming fraud. That's naturalclimatechange.us, naturalclimatechange.us. And I've got one on the water issues in the San Luis Valley called waterwatchalliance.us. And then my music website, which I guess I should mention,
sure,
since we're talking about music, is just my name, erickarlstrom.com. And right now I have a lady who's helping me update these things so that I'll be able to, better monitor them and add to them. But I make about 1 or 2 CDs a year. Got 22 out. And like the bluegrass joke, all my CDs are million sellers. I've got 1 million of them in my cellar.
Yeah.
In other words, I got my laundry cabinets full of my CDs. And, I have yet to find a way to really sell them. But it is fun to make them, and I feel like it's part of my mission on earth is to try to make beautiful music, because I think it is very edifying for the spirit. And I never really followed into the heavy rock and roll. I saw my friend Jimmy put a heroin needle in his arm back in 1969 or so. He'd gone from a very healthy, robust, tall athletic guy to a shadow, very pale, skinny guy with very seedy-looking friends and tracks on his arm.
Wow.
I saw that, and that had a bit of an effect on me.
I have a question for you, and this is a little bit off topic. First of all, I want to plug your websites. They're a cornucopia of information on those subjects. He adds more to them every week. Well, maybe not every week, but at least every year. And they grow bigger and bigger and deeper and deeper. And if you want to know something about global warming or the New Age agenda, they're indispensable resources. I want to ask you about a situation that occurred to myself and Mindy. Uh, we were working in, I was living in Vermont, and I was doing executive coaching. And one of the guys that I coached he wasn't the pastor of a church, he was a high-ranking member of a church. And it was a Pentecostal church, and he invited us to go down to see it. Now, the draw was, at that time I was interested in glossolalia, which is speaking in tongues. And he said, yeah, we do it at our church. So we drove down Sunday morning, and we went into this Pentecostal church. Now, we were the only white people in the church. And they saw us coming in, and they displayed the biggest outpouring of love that I've ever had displayed in my life. They took us in, sat us in the middle, up toward the front, made sure we were comfortable, and then things kicked off. Well, the music they were playing was, it was enchanted. I mean, immediately you got all wrapped up in it. And it wasn't like there was a choir. It was like there were people all around us singing. And a few of them were, we know that the system picks a few people they can make money out of and mind control, and they're the singing stars. There were 10 people in this room that could have. They were Aretha Franklin kind of quality singers. And then they got really into it. And then one woman started doing a little glossolalia. Now, glossolalia is speaking in tongues. It didn't seem strange at this time. It seemed like it was just a natural outgrowth of this beautiful, bluesy, kind of really heartfelt, spiritual music. And, the thing was over, and we felt... geez, how would you describe it? I mean, we felt renewed, uplifted, motivated. We had seen something we'd never seen before, but it seemed really positive. What would be your take on that in terms of someone who looks at music?
Well, again, music is subjective, so it's a very fuzzy line, a slippery slope. I really have enjoyed listening to the broadcasts, powerprophecy.com, which is Tex Mars, which is this, he was 22 years in the Air Force. Now he's a Christian pastor, does this home ministry, but also a mixture of geopolitics and biblical prophecy. Very, very educational. He's written 47 books of 48 books. So I really recommend that. He's done a number of videos and VHS or DVDs, and a couple of them really expose the Pentecostal movement to speaking in tongues. The Benny Hinn, the big preachers who are making lots and lots of money, as you say. And the names of the pastors escape me right now. I would recognize them, but there's a lot of. These are the big TV evangelists.
Right.
And the speaking in tongues that they do, again, seems like they're possessed of not the good angels, the bad angels. The shaking and the laughing and the rolling around down on the floor, the writhing. You see these people in their, their suit jackets,
Yeah.
just acting absolutely insane. And I think that they're, what they're telling themselves and each other is that, they're in the spirit and they're speaking in tongues. And that, amounts to gibberish,
Right.
making up a new language. And it sure looks for all the world as if they are more or less, again, possessed. I have to think, Paul, that, okay, the story out of the Bible is that when Satan rebelled, he took a third of the angels with him, which is a lot. I don't know, you hear different numbers, some people actually try to calculate, 200 million or whatever.
Right.
But again, the scenario is that these spirit beings, these demons, fallen angels, whatever, they don't die. They've been around. They have watched the generations. They're smarter than we are. They have ways to trick us, which of course is why in the Bible, we're supposed to, put on the full armor of God, to protect ourselves. Well, of course, a lot of us are brought up in secular families. We don't have that armor, so we're just kind of blundering along. And if you go with the scenario of the fallen angels, which there does seem to be a lot of evidence for with the possessed musicians and the possessed preachers and everything else, the possessed spies, look at Aleister Crowley, look at John Dee. I mean, these people were very bright people, but and then of course the whole MK Ultra, satanic ritual abuse, multiple personality, dissociative identity disorder. The scenario there, and I've got an extended article on the history and applications of mind control. That's my chapter 6 under the New World Religion ? Heading on my 911nwo.com website. Right. The MK Ultra, which again inherited from the Nazis, which is inherited from the Illuminati families, evidently. This is what the Illuminati, it goes back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, how you can traumatize a child under 6 with sexual abuse, among other things. And they split off personalities, alternate personalities, in order to preserve themselves. I mean, the trauma is so tremendous that in order to survive, this is a survival mechanism, they split off another personality and they completely dissociate first, and they lock away that memory to preserve themselves. They don't remember it. Then a new identity comes to the fore, and then, of course, going back to this Egyptian Book of the Dead, if there's a trainer handy, there's about a 20-second window of time where they can assign a new identity to that individual. It's a new subalter personality. They can install animal spirits, demon spirits, or they can name it, Fred, or, Betty, and Betty can be a sex slave or whatever, and Fred can be a assassin, super soldier, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, apparently demons can be installed. And then, then you're dealing with somebody who's got demons running around in their subconscious. They don't know it because there's amnesia barriers between these different subalter personalities. Well, Russ Dizdar, who is a Christian who's been fighting apparently these satanic cults since the 80s, he believes there are something like 10 million satanic super soldiers in this country, in America, and more in the world, of course, who can be triggered. They have handlers to perform certain tasks that they were designed for.
Right.
At the drop of a hat. So, for instance, we can run out a scenario. Let's say Operation Bluebeam were to occur, and this is, there's military, this is one of the many military plans that has been developed, and that is to have a mock alien invasion using holograms in the sky and things like
Right,
that.
right.
Well, let's say that there is this tremendous chaos-inducing event like Operation Bluebeam. Then all of a sudden, these 10 million or so satanic super soldiers could be triggered
Right,
to fulfill their tasks. Well, that would be quite a chaotic situation, wouldn't it?
right.
In fact, they could go on a killing spree. They could, and then it's order out of chaos and all that stuff of, the Freemasons, etc. Then they get their new world order. Well, they want to take down society. And it seems they have thousands of ways that they've been working on this. It's just phenomenal. So, the persistence of this agenda does seem to be accounted for by the fact that, there is this satanic, malevolent, overarching spirit coordinating things. And with a lot of help from the spirit world in the form of the powers and the principalities, and then the help from the human world as well. So, I'm not sure exactly what launched me off into
Well,
that.
I'm glad you did, because I think that a lot of that it's not difficult for us, and we're not extroverts. We don't know a lot of people to run into people in our everyday lives who have had this MK Ultra background. Actually, relatives we even know, and this last the satanic rituals that occurred around the Temple of Baal that was erected in London, and the Queen's birthday and all that ritual seems to have triggered off a lot of them, because there's a lot of the bizarre behavior in the news, and we know people that we know have gone off their rocker. So there might, we might have lived through the first triggering event here. Maybe not.
Yeah, and what you run into, Paul, is that this is a dangerous world. A lot of us, kind of grew up with a lot of a false sense of reality, a false sense of how the world is. I mean, my parents, although I was baptized as a Lutheran because my grandfather was a Lutheran minister, my parents were intellectuals, and then I was brought up as a Unitarian, which is kind of like this new age, let's have all the religions and mix them up and everything works and it's all good, and we'll have the joke is there's somebody dies and there's two signs, as they go into the next world, and one sign says heaven, an arrow pointing that way, and the other sign says discussion about heaven with an arrow pointing that way. The Unitarians will go to the discussion about
heaven, yeah.
But yeah, the intellectuals who want to go to church and sing songs, but have no belief in really, they don't have to have any belief in God or the divinity of Jesus or anything. So in that sense, I think the world that I was brought up in doesn't describe the real world. The real world apparently does, in fact, include these very dark influences that we're talking about.
Right.
And unless you have a sense of what's happening and the antidote or how to protect yourself, it's very, very easy to get swept up and become a victim, I think, like even my friend Jimmy Eisenberg. His father was a minister.
Love you too.
Okay, well, back in saddle here. I don't know if you can see me pick up this book. This is a very thick book. It's called Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller, and Evangelism in the Age of Oil.
Jeez.
Okay, Nelson Rockefeller, probably just as much or more than anybody else, has controlled the politics of South America.
Yeah.
Oil politics, as you probably know. And he has very much used the evangelical church. And, it's like that movie, At Play in the Fields of the Lord. Have you seen that movie? It's a great movie.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's Peter Matheson wrote a book, and then the movie is got Tom Berenger and Daryl Hannah and John Lithgow, and it tells the story of a very sincere evangelical Christians who go down to the Amazon to try to convert the natives, and they're not aware of the larger picture, which is that they're the first wave of invasion, and what the powers that be really want is to get those pesky natives out of there so they can have the gold, you know.
Right.
And so that's kind of the scenario of what has happened to the natives in South America, first with the Catholic Church and now with the Evangelical Church. Likewise, in my researches on Alan Dulles, Dulles and his brother, Alan Dulles, head of the CIA, and his brother, John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State under Eisenhower, they were Presbyterians. And in the 40s and 50s, the Presbyterian Church was used very much in their projects. So what we've seen then is the infiltration and utilization of the churches at different times, different denominations for, the power structure. So going back to this question that you raised about, this experience that you had, which sounds like a delightful experience. There's a slippery slope there. I can tell you an experience that I had recently, a little bit like that. Getting back to our musical theme, I was at a great bluegrass festival in Denton, North Carolina, put on by Doyle Lawson, who's got probably one of the best bluegrass bands that really does a lot of gospel. Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver. Doyle is from that area in North Carolina, which is, the ground zero of bluegrass as far as I'm concerned. And he had a great festival. He's done it for 30 years now. And great bands. And after 3 days of just unparalleled bluegrass, which has a fair gospel content, Doyle himself and his band went to kind of preside over a musical church service the next morning. They had imported an old wooden Baptist church or something. And of course, the fans, including myself, filled the old wooden church there. And there's Doyle Lawson leading the songs. And all these music lovers in this wooden church, no instruments. It was truly a religious experience to be part of that and to hear the harmonies. Now, what's funny is that these old boys and retirees from North Carolina, very unexpressive. They don't they don't like talk much.
Right.
But then when they open up their mouths to sing, oh my gosh, there it is. And so kind of confusing, but at the same time very inspiring, the music, and that's what one of the things that I connect with about the bluegrass music is the Christian message, the gospel message, the virtuoso instrumentals, the virtuoso vocals in these modern groups. But then it can flip over to the commercial gospel sound. I don't want to mention names of some of the groups that I find very, very saccharine, but there are those that I think are milking it, and it becomes a parody of itself. It becomes something that is slick and commercial. And there's the fan out there, and they're just kind of going with whatever they can find that they like. And they get drawn this way and that way. I think there's a lot of room for wolves in sheep's clothing when it comes to this kind of quote-unquote industry. The music industry can easily be co-opted by the money and the agents and whatnot. And then it can become very, like these big TV evangelists. I mean, they're phony. They're fraudulent. They're milking the public, So it becomes very, very challenging and confusing. The Pentecostals, the evangelicals especially, seem to be, prone towards, the speaking in tongues, hoodwinking their own flock. You look at the video clips of some of these events, and my gosh, these people are being fleeced by wolves in sheep clothing.
Right. Yeah, demons in human clothing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a better way to put it. And they're in the Christian church right and left. So when you say you're a Christian nowadays, what does that mean? I don't know. But
Right.
I think it does come back to a belief in, the person of Jesus, the message of Jesus, the belief that he was resurrected. I just got a book about the Shroud of Turin, which of course is his burial cloth, and so much work has been done on that. And it's kept in a Catholic church there in Turin, Italy. And I believe that was his burial cloth. And I believe that when he came back to life, there was a burst of radiant energy, which kind of burned his image onto the cloth, which was, a cloth that was the type of cloth that was used 2,000 some years ago, when he, of course, died and was crucified and was resurrected. And well, here's a little funny story for you. My dad's a geologist and believes in evolution, of course, and his father was a Lutheran minister. Carbon dating of the Shroud back in the late 80s, and I had read a book about it. I think it was in the 80s at some point. And I bet my dad $100. I said, this is going to date around the time of Christ. And he is an earth scientist, and I'm an earth scientist. And he bet against it. And turned out the date came back medieval, about 1300. So I,
Right.
paid up my $100. I was rather disappointed. Well, now they've done some more work on it, and they've shown that, about that time there was a fire.
Right.
And the edges of the shroud were burned, and they evidently patched it with a reweaving process that was used in France at that time in the Middle Ages, where they actually wove new threads in with the old threads, which of course would explain the younger
Right.
date. And so I'm once again believe that for those of us who are doubting Thomases, that this shows that Jesus Christ was who he says he was, which is God.
Right.
Well, okay, if that's the God of the universe, we want to keep that in mind. I mean, this is in other words, we're not gods, and of course that gets back to Genesis,
Right.
and the story of Genesis and the serpent tempting Eve and Adam. Surely ye can be as gods, and surely ye will not die. You can live forever. Well, this is the lie that so many of these rock group stars buy into, and so many of the New Age people buy into. We're gods,
Right.
and it's right there in the Bible. No, we're not gods.
Right.
God's God, and Jesus is God, and the Holy Spirit. These are God. This is God, and it's a proper view of how things are in the universe.
Yeah, they worship the creation instead of the creator.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's very seductive. And I know lots of good people that are do-gooders and want to improve themselves, and they live all around me in Crestone, and they are New Agers, and they are light bearers.
They're going to be light bearers. Yeah.
What's that?
They're light bearers, all right.
Yes, I'm afraid there's a different kind of light. It's the Illuminati kind of light,
Right.
which is the satanic Luciferian. Lucifer means the light bearer.
Absolutely.
And so this is a tremendous confusion that we have. And again, your heart goes out for the people who are victim of these kinds of confusion. Cults, very confusing because they've learned how to exploit people's loneliness and their confusion and love bomb them and pull them in. And
Right.
pretty soon you're a member of, the Church of Scientology, which is
Right.
going to take you for every dime you ever
That's
had,
right.
and
There's-
make you think you're God.
That's right. There's a lot of it out there. As a matter of fact, there's more deception probably than truth in that church, and that's really too bad because that's the life rap. That's the saving That's the saving grace. The way we came through it is well, in addition to hearing you on Red Ice Radio, at the end of one interview, I probably said this before, but Hendrik said, "And where are you? Where do you come down on religion?" And you said, "Well, I don't have a religion, but if I was going there, it would be Christianity." And then, of course, a year later, so we've talked, and I've known you've become a Christian. I've become a Christian also. But I came through it through the study of Satanism, actually looking into ritual child abuse with two friends of ours who had children taken in the Hempstead cover-up, and then finding out that the Satanists aren't shy about saying who their enemy is and who they belittle. I can remember hearing the beginning of a concert that was Emmylou Harris. Now, I think she's somehow connected to Laurel Canyon. She might even be one of the original people, but she came on, and before she played her number, she made a little salute to Satan, and she referred to his penis as his Jesus Christ. So you know that that's the opposite. You know, if it's called a prophetic research, where you study the opposite to find the truth. So that's how we got there. And
Excellent. Whatever it takes. I think that's a very legitimate way to get there. I mean, the good news really doesn't make that much sense unless you understand the bad news.
Right, exactly.
And you've discovered the bad news, and the bad news, even your example. I mean, let's go back to music. Joan Baez and Emmylou Harris both, I think, are very much a product of this kind of MK Ultra scenario, like the Laurel Canyon people. Emmylou Harris's father, I think, was military intelligence.
Yeah.
Likewise, Joan Baez. Her father was a CIA psychologist or psychiatrist working at Columbia, something like that. One of these MK Ultra spychiatrists, in all likelihood.
Right.
In some of her songs. Now, of course, we all love Joan Baez and Emmylou Harris. I mean, I couldn't.
They're good.
Two more beautiful, finer singers and beautiful, so it's all there. You think, my gosh, this beautiful person, beautiful voice. That's perfection. And yet, when you look a little deeper, it would appear that these two might be actual products of this MK Ultra kinds of mind control, which again, it breaks your heart. I mean, but it's in the words to some of Joan Baez's songs. She admits this in her songs. I don't have the words in my head or can't call them up, but somebody who wanted to go online could find out just what I'm talking about. So yeah, things are very confusing, and it takes maybe a little while, if you're lucky, to come.
In fact, they'll shut us down. I was shocked to hear what happened to McGowan. I didn't know he was dead. But
I think he had a fairly fast-acting lung cancer, but he smoked a lot, so it's hard to know exactly.
Yeah.
Whether he smoked himself to death or whether it was induced. Don't know.
Wow. Well, they have. I can remember seeing that Senate hearing where, among others, Senator Goldwater was sitting there, and they were talking about this little. Now, this is in the 70s. This little gun that could deliver heart attacks.
Yes.
Or fast-acting cancer. So
that's right. I remember that. Yeah.
It's well within their technology.
Back in the 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. So now, it's not surprising to see Judge Scalia being immediately taken out. He was involved in. I think he was killed either during or right after one of those satanic rituals. He was involved in a. That's what I had read anyway.
Yeah, me too. I had also read the same, that he might have been part of a cult that was meeting in Texas, and the pedophilia would have been a part of it, and he might even have been killed by one of his I guess younger sex partners.
Wow. This now, can you remember back to the 60s when you were in college, this piece of news? I mean, it would be so far out of believability,
Yeah.
but in today's world, it's just yeah, okay, well, yeah, he was probably involved with a sex cult and killed by one of his pedophilic companions. Oh,
Isn't that something?
it's
Well,
amazing.
that's certainly certainly that going around on the internet. Tex Mars has that on his website, and again, he's a guy that I've gotten a lot of information from. Nobody gets 100% though, so you always have to kind of keep in mind there might be alternatives that you don't know.
That matter of fact, that's a good topic. We should talk about that. Uh, how the how this movement is coalescing, and a lot of us have a little bit of it wrong, a lot of us have a little bit more of it's wrong, but rather than dismissing people because they're just not totally on target or having, knowing knowing the story exactly the way you know the story, but I think it's important that we all, listen to one another and take the good stuff with this, be discerning, but still be open. Maybe.
Yeah, I agree. I think if you look, I did an interview with Deanna Spingola recently, and she said something at the beginning to the effect that, well, when I started out, I thought this, and then my opinions have moved along based on new information. That's just the way it is. And I agreed with her wholeheartedly. It's, you start from wherever you are, and assuming that you're honest and you want to find the truth, you're going to have to go through a process of, as you say, kind of elimination, critical thinking, going down this alley, going down that alley. And I think some of the alleys are going to fool you for a while. And hopefully, if you're really on the trail of the truth, it will self-correct. But we have to understand and admit that, we're up against people like Michael Aquino and the information warfare document that he put out in 1980. There's a tremendous war, wars are won and lost in the minds of men kind of thing. And Tavistock and the CIA and whatnot are in the war for the battle for our minds, and disinformation is used all the time, and so yeah, we're going to be fooled.
Right.
But when you learn something like going back to where we were, that Joan Baez, this icon of beautiful folk music, had a father who was a psychiatrist at Columbia, and that she herself might be a victim of this kind of MK Ultra mind control. I mean, this throws a whole different light on the world as we know it.
Exactly. And they're all victims, which is really very interesting. When we went through this Hampstead cover-up, I don't know whether you know the story, but there was two children, and they were systematically, ritually abused, and they were practicing Satanism during the school day. And the father was the head of the cult and would assist them in decapitating babies that they had procured for that purpose. But when you look at the whole scenario, that it's a multi-generational satanic cult. So, the father, the head of the cult, he's victimized because he was born into it. I mean, look at Joan Baez. I mean, just because she was born to a father that was a CIA psychologist, she's mind controlled by these monsters and set about doing its handiwork. I mean, it's really, we're all victimized, especially these artists.
Yes, and Hitler himself may have been a victim like this, and he thought that World War II was all about the Superman, Ubermensch. And, I've kind of pondered what is that? What is this Superman? It could be that what he's referring to does have to do with something like this satanic ritual abuse programming, where you install demons within the alter structures of the personality, and then you harness those energies, whether consciously or unconsciously, to get done what you need to do. I mean, this could be what he meant. I don't know. I mean, Joan Baez would have to almost be a Superman in the sense of, look how talented she is.
Yeah.
She's a star. Maybe you can program stars. Maybe you can make stars in this manner. Give them some extra power and horsepower from the satanic world that they may never fully understand.
Right. The demons are souls of the Nephilim. Do you know that story?
Yes.
You know, I'm not that familiar with the Bible, but that these are disincarnate entities that are looking to possess people to act through them, and so they're all around on that mission. And you know, somebody like Joan Baez, who has gotten that deep into it, I'm sure could easily be a vehicle for this kind of possession. You got to call it possession.
Yeah, and what's so tricky and so challenging here is that Joan Baez would have been the heroine of a whole generation, of my generation and yours. For her, she combined this natural talent, beautiful voice, untrained, beautiful voice, with this humanitarian impulse, which she's always kind of, for this cause and for that cause. So, what could be sweeter, more pure, more, you would really look up to somebody like that. And I've known people that looked up to her on many levels. I always just thought she was a great voice. Other females I know looked up to her as a role model. So if it's the case that, as it might be, that she herself is a victim of this kind of programming, which means she's not really in control of what she's doing, that she might be kind of a marionette used by others, would have a handler, etc. That really puts a whole different spin on the world that we live in, because now our heroes and our heroines they're not what we think they are.
Yeah, but it's really because we're programmed into want to be influenced by cult of personality. We want someone to look up to. We want someone to be the hero. We want these people to be loving, and they are loving. I mean, they're the way the there's you pick your favorite movie star. I'm thinking of I like Steve Carell. Is that his name, Carell? Steve. Well, anyway, you know that in order to get into the movies and take a place in the limelight, that you've really got to have an arrangement with the dark forces, because the dark forces run these industries, and they influence through them. So you don't want that. You don't want to think that. You want to think that they're just people that you could talk to, and they'd be God-fearing the same as everybody else. But
yeah, and I think that the beginning of the realization that you just expressed, when we start to realize how very, very involved the Hollywood and the music industry are in this satanic program, then it becomes and the media, the news, etc.
yeah,
This it becomes then a matter of self-preservation to really limit the intake that you have. I don't watch TV anymore. I don't watch too many movies. A good movie I'll watch over and over again, but I'm not a real movie freak. I think that we have to find the real. Uh, Michael Crichton made a good statement back before he was, I think, killed in an untimely way with a quick-acting cancer. Um, he said the biggest challenge facing modern humans is to separate reality from fantasy and propaganda. Because, and again, he was talking about the New Age religion. He was talking about the global warming fraud back in 2003. His book, State of Fear, excellent book showing that the global warming is a fraud, but geoengineering is very real. And behind the global warming fraud, that's really kind of a cover for the weather warfare, weather modification, geoengineering programs that we have seen. So a lot of the funding would have come from, quote unquote, the global warming. So what we've seen then is this, all this government money going into weaponization of the atmosphere, weaponization of space, weaponization of the weather, so that it can be used as a means of punishing countries that are not compliant, or taking them down economically. You slam a hurricane into a coastline
Right?
at full force, or you impose a drought, like I think was recently imposed in California. The breadbasket, one of the breadbaskets of America. You can bring a nation to its knees with weather warfare. And so behind the global warming cover story, we have to get used to the idea that the CIA has been running this country through Tavistock, et cetera, for all our lives, going back to World War II and probably a little before, if you look at the Dulles brothers. And how do spies work? Well, they always have a cover. They always have a cover story. So if intelligence agencies are running the world, well, it's not surprising that you're going to have cover stories. You're going to have a series of stories out there, like Osama bin Laden did 911,
Right.
or driving our cars is causing catastrophic global warming. These are the cover stories. So to be an intelligent and responsible citizen, I would suggest, requires, unfortunately, looking behind these media propaganda covers to the reality. I remember I was in my class, human ecology. I taught that for something like 20 years at Cal State University, Stanislaus. And I quoted Joseph Goebbels, the Ministry of Propaganda in the Nazi regime, who said, a great country needs great propaganda. And I said, yeah, Germany was a great country, is a great country. It had great propaganda, but people knew it was propaganda because they called it propaganda. Likewise, in the Soviet Union, they had a great propaganda system, but everybody knew it was propaganda. Pravda was the only newspaper, and everybody knew it was lies. But in America, we have an even better propaganda system because we call it the news, and
Right.
people believe it.
That's right. And it's almost the most addictive substance on the planet, because how many videos we've put out talking about the fact that TV was designed, it never has been anything but a mind control device. They give you sigils, they give you symbols, they talk to your subconscious. You talk about 1 million or 10 million people that are programmed and could be triggered. You don't know what's in your brain if you watch TV. You don't know what they've put in there. You don't know what opinion that's not yours that they've given you. It's an amazing thing, but people can't stop. It's like the most amazing phenomenon. I mean, we'll talk to friends and relatives, and they just can't seem to stop it.
Yeah, well, I'm not hooked up, so I don't have a TV,
Yeah.
and I'm not on Netflix anymore. Although I do like some of the movies that I've purchased, but books, reality is very time consuming for me, with all the books that I have, and then with the beautiful nature where I live. Reality is preferable to me, but I understand, and especially the young people. They got their iPods and their iPads and their iPhones, and their world is really it's a mixture of reality and the digital computer world. I talked to a young lady at an ice cream store, I think, as I was traveling down to Mexico last year, and I was telling her I was going down to Baja and whatnot, and she seemed to think that because she wouldn't be able to find it on her iPhone, that it was not possible to go down to Baja. So in other words, her world doesn't include looking at maps.
Right.
It includes looking at her little digital reality in front of her on her iPhone. And if she can't find it on her digital reality, it doesn't exist. And so I feel really kind of sorry for that person
Yeah.
and that generation. You know, I feel a little, I guess, more fortunate that I grew up in a world where, you know, we looked at maps and realized that we could go to those places. She didn't seem to think it was possible.
Incredible. Incredible. Well, we've been talking about you and I as boomers coming through.
Right.
Look at the millennials. Those poor people. The music isn't even good. Uh, it's bad music. They're really tied into their communication devices, and it's really funny. What they did with our generation is they gave us moral relativity. In other words, our generation leaned more toward do what you want. You can rationalize it. It's subjective. There's no moral right and wrong. What they did to the millenniums is it's reality relativity. In other words, my reality may be different than your morality. You know, like if you think that you're a woman even though you're in a man's body, well, that's fine. You know, if you think you're Chinese even though you're in a Caucasian or some other they've taken away reality. So they have reality relativity. You know, it's
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's well said. What you hear around where I live in Crestone, which is certainly one of the new age capitals in America, even though it's very small, you know, people will say, well, that's your truth.
yeah,
You,
yeah,
and, and, uh, um, and of course, that is encouraged here, and that's very much tolerated because we have all these different religions here. So a Buddhist would look at the world one way, a Sufi would look at it another, a Catholic one way, a Baptist, etc. And so you have your reality, and I have my reality, and it's not up to me to try to correct you because your reality is your reality. Well, you can see how that could get pretty crazy pretty quick, you know. And even in Buddhism, they talked about relative truth and absolute truth, and then they talked about true relative truth and false relative truth. False relative truth would be, there's a bunch of bunnies going across the sky right now,
yeah.
and that becomes your reality. Bunnies galloping across the sky. Well, we have to agree on, I think, if we're going to be a nation that's coherent and competent and capable of, supporting itself and providing for a new generation, we have to agree, say, to speak language. We have to agree on, 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Right.
Of course, Orwell's message was, Big Brother, if you're going to play ball with Big Brother, 2 plus 2 is whatever Big Brother wants you to think it is, or
Right.
whatever. You'll say it to please him because you're afraid of the pain of disagreeing. Well, I think we're very close to that.
Yeah.
People saying, well, two and two is whatever you want it to be, because please don't hurt me anymore,
That's right.
That's torture. And of course, what we're talking about is psychological warfare against, kind of cultural terrorism of the police state here.
Right.
And the media and the Hollywood, all part of that picture. People are afraid to. It took a lot of courage for our founding fathers, to stand up to, the British East India Company and George the Third of England, and they had to put their lives on the line, saying, okay, we're not going to buy into that. There's been a long train of abuses, and we can see this is not coincidence, and we can see you're trying to subjugate us. So therefore, we'll go to war rather than be your slaves. And I think we're there again almost in the sense that it's so easy for people to, from fear of some kind of reprisal, not question, say 911, not question the global warming fraud. It's yeah, whatever. 2 + 2 = 5 if you want,
Right.
because otherwise, I'm in danger. My world is in danger. Well, again, those founding fathers at some point stepped up and said, well, something's on the line here. We're not going to just lick the hand that feeds us and continue to be their slaves. America, I hope, has enough people who can stand up with that kind of integrity. And some of the comments from our founding fathers, integrity does come from kind of a moral compass. And that was there in the majority of the
Right.
citizens at the time. Integrity comes from that, belief in God and the Bible and the New Testament. And if we have been pulled far enough off our moorings in that regard with the New Age movement and all this other, satanic music, etc., then it's going to be easy for the powers that be, the ruling elite, whatever you want to call it, the globalists, the whatever, the fascists, the feudalists, to subjugate us again. And I don't think there's much question that that's what they want to do,
Right. And here we have millenniums, and you've worked with them, who I can't even imagine having a conversation because you both have different realities. How would you move forward a how would you do that? And then of course they're devoid of morality because our generation worked on that one. So it's a pickle we're in, I think.
Yeah, I would say we're in a pickle. And then it comes back down, I think, for yourself and myself and whatnot, it comes back down to our own kind of being faithful to our own beliefs, and then hoping that there might be some positive spin-off with others. I mean, we do teach each other by our example, and if we set ourselves up to kind of stand for certain principles. And here again, I'm the first to admit that my life has not been, saintly or above.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
In other words, I'm a sinner too.
Yeah.
But again, with Christianity, the nice thing about it is that you acknowledge that. I mean, we all are, and you ask forgiveness, and we are assured that that is there for us. That there is a merciful,
right,
supreme being, a God of love and forgiveness. Now that's pretty compelling. If we can share that message with others, I think maybe some people are going to buy into it, and maybe you think of those 12 apostles back in those early days. They had a steep hill to climb. 12 apostles, and look what has been accomplished, in Jesus' name.
It's still, that's right. It's still around.
It's bigger than ever, so it's probably the dominant religion in the world in terms of numbers. But then again, there's a lot of variations and a lot of corruption of those churches. But 75 to 80% of Americans would still identify themselves as Christian. So depending on how valid that identification is, I think that there is hope. I mean, well, of course, there's always hope. I mean,
right.
if you believe that Jesus is the God of the universe and God is the God of the universe, then of course there's hope. And they say Satan has a plan, but God has a bigger plan. So in a way, Satan's plan, they say, fits into God's plan, and at some point, thy will be done. It's whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and of course, the Book of Revelations is full of fairly dire predictions about what's coming down. And a lot of people would say we may be very close to those end days right now. And then it becomes a matter of, holding on to your hope and your faith and your integrity,
Right.
even unto death. I mean, we're going to die, and if we believe in an afterlife, which of course I do, then which side you're on makes a big difference, like eternal.
Right, exactly. I also think that how bad does the tribulation have to be? I mean, how bad do we have to allow it to be? Do we as people alive on the planet today, functioning, thinking, talking, can we mitigate some of the horrific things that are predicted to come down? In other words, if we expose and expose and expose what's going on, and people wake up and wake up, I think that's going to. I think first of all, I think that's what Christ would expect us to do, and second of all, I think it's going to be good for everybody. So, I'm one in favor of staying active in this thing, not just resting back and.
Yeah, that's a very important issue. Of course, there are many Christians and whole denominations that are committed to, let's bring it on, because we want the rapture, we want to go to heaven, we want to set the stage for the end days, and they're quite excited about it. And then you get people like Tex Mars, like I say, who would have I think a more realistic long-term picture, which is that, look, Satan has been trying to bring us to this point, basically, since Jesus was crucified and before. And the only thing that has kept us from falling into complete satanic Antichrist kingdom is the work of Christians who opposed Satan. And then, he'd quote the Bible saying, Jesus came to expose and oppose the works of the devil. And those of us who would want to count ourselves as Christian then would have some responsibility, I think, to do that, which is we're looking for the truth. He is the truth. We're looking, to counter, to be his representatives, hopefully on this planet. I think that's probably, for me, the safest and most logical approach at this point. Makes most sense to me. But it's not comfortable, because if you oppose the world system, and of course Satan is the ruler of this world, you're going to catch some heat, and you're going to get some opposition.
Right. But you just have to keep your faith, keep your mind together, and keep going. Doing whatever is demanded of you, and it's kind of not like demanded. It's like you get out of your brain and into your mind, and you let yourself do the right thing every day, and it leads you to doing things like we just did, having a great conversation on music and how Satanism influences that music, and how the elites are using Satanism to control us, mind control us, and bring us into the destruction of the Creator's precious creations. So
yeah, absolutely, Paul. Let me just that kind of triggered a thought which I had before the conversation, and it comes back, which is, okay, why would a guy like Aleister Crowley, MI6 British, Cambridge grad, went to climb in the Himalayas, obviously a very powerful guy, why would he become a Satanist? Why would he try to bring so many others to Satan? Well, you can look at this from the spiritual point of view. Obviously, he did become a Satanist. Obviously, if you believe in that, he's resting in hell today. But there's another reason, and that, I think, is the ruling elite wants society to fall into chaos, so they will have an excuse to come in and impose martial law.
Right.
You know, in other words, you people can't take care of yourselves. You cannot rule yourselves. You're incompetent to rule yourselves. You're out of control. So we're going to have to send in the troops. Now, if you have a society which is self-moderating, a Christian society, which I think America was until our generation, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
we've been duped. I mean,
We've been duped.
We've been duped. We're always fooled into going to wars, you know, for some bogus reason. But there was this Christian core of, I think, I could be wrong on that, Christian core of kind of self-control. And I think what the 60s and the music is about is just throw that out the window. And of course, that will send, if you believe in the spiritual world, which we do, will send individuals to hell on a personal level, but it will also take the whole society with it. And then the feudalists, the martial law people can more justifiably come in and say, well, we're going to have to take over. In fact, they've been trying to create the chaos so that they can impose the new order. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something to look forward to. I don't know.
It could get hairy.
It's really good. Well, Eric, this has been a great conversation. I want you to remind people of your websites because I've spent a lot of time on there, and you can learn a lot on a couple subjects, and then we'll sign off. Tell them about your websites, Eric.
Okay, Paul. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Very interesting discussion. Something that we both have some track record with, which is the music and the culture.
Right.
But yeah, my websites are, again, as a 30-year university professor, I have, you know, just from a logical point of view, come to realize that 911 was not as it was portrayed, and likewise, man-caused global warming, not as it's portrayed. So starting from a logical point of view, what's really going on? Well, that inspired my investigations. So that the websites I have are 911nwo.com, obviously for 911 and the New World Order. And then the climate change, global warming site is naturalclimatechange.us. And that really is my field, academic field. Climate change is natural, and so is weather variation. And then waterwatchalliance.us on water issues. And then finally, my musical website is erickarlstrom.com, just my name.
And it's Karlstrom, O-M, not U-M, like strum a guitar.
That's right, Karlstrom, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Eric. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I hope we can do it again in the future.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your efforts. I think it's really, really enjoyable now that you're in Ecuador to make this this cross-continental this communication we have going.
That's right.
Okay.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Have a good day. Yeah,
Same to you, Eric.
Thank you.